We have also announced a ban on maritime LNG, all to curb funding of Russia's war chest. Russia's heinous policy to deport, indoctrinate and militarise Ukrainian children demonstrates the depths to which they will sink to eradicate Ukrainian identity and future. The UK has committed more than £2.8 million to support Ukrainian efforts to facilitate the return and reintegration of children deported by Russia. Since the beginning of September, Ukraine's pilot tracing mechanism, which the UK is co-funding, has already identified over 600 additional children who were deported to the Russian Federation or relocated within the temporarily occupied territories. The Foreign Secretary discussed this issue with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister during last week's inaugural meeting of the UK-Ukraine Strategic Dialogue. We're working internationally in support of Ukraine and Canada, who are co-chairing the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children.
Dame Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker, this House has been resolute in its support for Ukraine and its defence of its territory, sovereignty and freedom. Since 2022, the level of support we've given to Ukraine has been at the forefront of working with them to secure peace on their terms. With US military officials in Ukraine today, we need to know what role the UK government and the coalition of the willing is playing. So can the Minister tell this House what is the government's position on the reports that the United States is brokering a deal with Russia that will involve Ukraine making territorial concessions to Russia, with Russia gaining territory or holding some of a lease arrangement where they effectively control the east of Ukraine? Were the UK involved in drawing up these proposals? The report suggests that the Ukrainian armed forces will be reduced and limited as a result of these proposals. What is the government's view on this? Are these reports accurate, or are there proposals on the table that align more closely with our view and the Ukrainian view that Russia should leave Ukraine? Can the Minister give an update on the steps being taken to pressure Russia and its economy? We know of the sanctions measures and they're being kept under review, but are proactive steps being taken to press countries to stop refining Russian oil? Turkey, India and China all have refineries and are significant importers of Russian oil. When the Prime Minister was meeting the Turkish President last month, did the Prime Minister raise this issue and press them to stop? We've asked this before but did not get a direct yes or no answer. Have British ministers raised this issue with their Chinese counterparts when they're going to discuss with the CPP ministers when it comes to their shuttle diplomacy in Beijing? Is there an update on securing the proceeds from the sale of Chelsea to support Ukraine? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, today is World Children's Day, and our thoughts are with the reported 20,000 Ukrainian children abducted by Putin. We welcome the reports of the returns and the rescue of 1,800 Ukrainian children, but what further steps are being taken by Britain to secure their return as soon as possible? And is this a priority in the talks that are now taking place?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the tone of her question. This whole House is united on these questions, both in support of Ukraine and in outrage at the iniquity of what the Russians are doing in relation to Ukrainian children. We are glad of our partnership with the Ukrainian government in the new tracing mechanism. As I said in my statement, it has made some progress since September in identifying more than 600 children who should be returned to Ukraine, and we will use our full efforts to ensure that that is the case. The Shadow Foreign Secretary asks about some of the reports in recent days. She will, I'm sure, have seen the US Secretary of State's statement this morning, in which he indicates that there are a range of ideas that are being discussed. Of course, the Foreign Secretary is in direct and regular discussions with the US Secretary of State and made an important statement last week at the G7 in relation to these questions. That statement reiterated that an immediate ceasefire is urgently needed. We should be clear. President Zelensky is ready for an immediate ceasefire. The UK supports him in that initiative. It is President Putin who is failing to come to the table. What should be the starting point of negotiations? That was clear in the G7 statement. The current line of contact should be the starting point of negotiations, and we remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force, and I know that is a principle held with great force across the whole of the House.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, on International Children's Day, we are reminded that safeguarding the next generation isn't just a value we hold dear, it's a responsibility of every member of this House. More than 100 members of this House over recent days have backed President Zelensky's Bring Kids Back initiative, standing united with Ukraine and its stolen children. And I want to thank every member who has done so. I also want to thank the Minister for working with me on supporting the Ukrainian government's launch of a new pilot programme, Tracing the Children, which since September has found 600 of those children. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, if media reports over the last 24 hours are to be believed, that is the US brokered peace deal, it should trouble every single one of us. Because a deal that trades away Ukrainian territory, that trades away Ukrainian security and makes no mention at all of the 20,000 children that Russia have stolen from Ukraine, is not peace. It is capitulation, and this House should stand united in rejecting that proposed deal. Can the Minister assure this House that before any peace deal is considered, that the future of Ukrainians' 20,000 stolen children will be top of that agenda?
Stop.
I know that the whole House recognises my honourable friend's work on this issue ever since she's arrived in this place and before. It is at the top of our minds, the atrocities that have been conducted against Ukrainian families. The removal of children must be first among them. This remains a priority for this government. I described the tracing mechanism, as did my honourable friend. We are pleased with the results since the pilot began in September. I can confirm that the Foreign Secretary discussed it with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister during his visit last week, and we will continue to work on these issues. It cannot become the norm in international relations to kidnap children and relocate them. That is what we have seen from the Russians, and that is what we oppose, and that is why we will continue to work in the way that we are. I've already provided some response on the questions of negotiations, but to set out the very obvious, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Ukrainian flag flies from the building of the Foreign Office. It flies from many churches in Lincolnshire, as I know it does, across constituencies represented in this House this morning. The UK is steadfast in its support for Ukraine. It will be for Ukraine to determine the negotiations into which it is prepared to enter, and that is what the Foreign Secretary was discussing with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, the US Secretary of State, and a range of her other international partners last week.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Donald Trump's latest proposals for securing peace in Ukraine might as well have been written in the Kremlin. Indeed, they probably were. Those in Reform UK who have been paid to repeat Russian propaganda may disagree, but I believe those in the House today will see this for what it is. If Kyiv is pressed by Moscow and Washington into accepting these terms, which include the surrender of the Donbass and a halt on vital weapons supplies, it would be no less than a betrayal of our Ukrainian allies. Well said. So will the Minister publicly express the government's unequivocal rejection of these proposals, including the sacrifice of Ukrainian sovereign territory? Will the government urgently convene a coalition of the willing with a view to generating fresh support for Ukraine? The abduction of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children by the Kremlin is the clearest and most grotesque evidence of Putin's cruelty and his desire to erase a whole nation. It will go down as one of the gravest crimes of the war. So what further financial support is the government offering to bring back kids? And will the Minister back my bill to seize Russian assets in the UK and make those proceeds available to help Ukraine's children, women and men?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for his question. I won't answer on Reform's approach to these questions. They haven't made themselves available this morning, unlike many others who I know have a deep commitment and interest in these questions. The Liberal Democrat spokesperson asked me about the funding that we have committed to tracing and reunited Ukrainian children. We have provided more than 2.8 million in support of these efforts. He asked about the latest reporting about what a deal might look like. I'll draw his attention to the very most recent statement in which both the US, UK and the G7 were committed, which I read from earlier, which was last week, and indeed the US Secretary of State's statement this morning as well.
Dame Nia Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I congratulate my honourable friend for Paisley in future for her excellent work in respect to the stolen Ukrainian children. And we all want to see them returned as soon as possible. But does the Minister agree with me that it's only through greater resolve, unity and support from the West that will drive back Russia's outrageous demands for Ukrainian territory and pave the way for a peace which represents Ukraine's interests? And what more can he do to encourage greater support for Ukraine from our allies?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think there is resolve in Ukraine amongst its allies, and there is very significant unity. There have been a range of steps in recent weeks, including the sanctions that the Shadow Foreign Secretary referred to, the steps announced over the weekend in relation to Ukrainian children, and of course the strategic dialogue with Ukraine that the Foreign Secretary conducted here in London last week. We will continue to press. There is an illusion, I fear, taking root in Moscow, which is that one more push, yet further military operations will lead to a weakening of resolve in Ukraine, in the UK and across the West. That is an illusion. We will remain steadfast in support of our Ukrainian friends.
Sir Bernard Jenkin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just remind the Minister that I'm looking forward to tabling a motion for a backbench business debate on the subject of Ukraine, which will refer to the 20,000 abducted children, and I join with him in congratulating the Honourable Lady for Paisley and Renfrewshire for the work she is doing on this subject. But it will also draw attention to the other atrocities. Just this week we welcomed 2 former Ukrainian prisoners of war who had been held and tortured by the Russians completely without regard to the Geneva Conventions for prisoners of war, because the Russians, of course, fabricate this narrative that they're not at war in Ukraine, they are conducting some special military operation. So they have no regard for any of the norms of warfare which we would expect any civilized country to have. Can he underline the point that the Trump proposals are unacceptable? And will he join all the NATO allies together to make it clear to the United States that these proposals are unacceptable?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I'll ensure that the Minister for Europe is aware of his proposals in relation to further discussions in this House on these very important questions. He is right to draw a line, to draw attention to the clearly preposterous Russian position that they are engaged in an operation rather than a war. I am less well versed in military matters than the Minister for Armed Forces, but this is clearly not an operation. Some years in, thousands upon thousands of casualties of men, women and children in, and a very significant loss to Russian forces even over the last month. He asked about our position in relation to some of the media speculation. He'll understand why I'm reluctant to be drawn in great detail. I can point him to the very clear statement from the G7 last week, and indeed to the latest comments from the US Secretary of State this morning.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The stealing of 20,000 children like this is an outrage. Can I thank the Minister for his statement? Does he agree with me that the Bring Kids Back campaign is right to emphasise the return of these children as non-negotiable in any future peace deal?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. It is non-negotiable. You cannot steal children in 2025. I think that is an acceptable way to conduct war. The relevant international legal provisions are absolutely clear, and I know that this whole House, and indeed the whole country, is genuinely outraged by what the Russians have done.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Putting forward proposals that could have been drafted by the killer in the Kremlin himself, it seems that President Trump has finally given up on the Nobel Peace Prize and is content to settle for the Lenin Peace Prize instead. Does the government share my concern at the remarks, admittedly aspirational, by the US ambassador to NATO that his long-term hope would be to see Germany take over America's role at the heart of the alliance? Doesn't that betray the decades of peace after the Second World War that NATO was created to preserve?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not familiar with the Lenin Peace Prize. I will Google it afterwards. I've been clear on the position. I've been clear on the basis of negotiations. Clearly, it is for Ukraine, as a sovereign nation, to determine the position that it takes in negotiations. I did see some of the reports about the discussion. I think it was, to be fair, about who should perform the role of saqueur rather than what the future division between forces would be in NATO. NATO remains a vital component of European security, perhaps the most signal commitment between Europe and America of our shared defence and shared values, and long may it continue.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russia is enduring significant financial pressure as a result of their illegal war in Ukraine. Does the Minister share my view we must impose maximum economic pressure on Russia to force Putin to the negotiating table?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do. I feel great sadness for the Russian people, because the truth is President Putin appears to be happy to endure their hardship at almost any cost. The Russians are suffering terribly, both on the battlefield and in their standards of living across Russia. The sensible thing for President Putin to do, the thing that he has refused to do, is enter into the ceasefire talks that President Zelensky, the UK, and many of our allies have called him to enter into. This is not complicated, this is not difficult. We will continue to apply financial pressure on the Russians until he does so, and it is with great regret that some of those sanctions will put further pressure on the already suffering Russian people. That is what we must do, that is what we will continue to do until those ceasefire talks begin.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is very well read, and so therefore I wonder if you can identify at any point in history where the appeasement of an aggressive expansionist autocrat has ever worked out well. And can he explain to the population of these isles and the rest of Europe, who've endured those energy prices for the last 3 years, who took Ukrainians into our homes, and who listened to his government and the previous government unite the House, saying whatever it takes and however long it takes, we'll get Ukraine's sovereign territory back. And here we are with the United States apparently in bilateral talks with Russia about how to carve up Ukraine. Does he have any positive message around about what the UK's role is in rejecting that? And if he doesn't have a positive message for me here today, what's the message from the UK to our allies in Norway, in Finland, in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland and Moldova, who know very well what appeasement of Russia looks like and feels like?
Minister.
Madam Deputy, I thank the honourable member for his kind words. This is my message for the people of Eastern Europe. This is my message for the people of the UK. We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force. Russia will not win. They are not winning. They are suffering terribly in trying to pursue a so-called operation which is bringing nothing but misery to the Russians. I hope that they realise that swiftly. I hope that they start ceasefire talks on the basis of the line of contact, and that Ukraine is in a position to secure its full and sovereign rights, and that is what the British government is committed to.
Kirsten Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Using the kidnapping of children as a weapon in its illegal invasion of Ukraine is absolutely abhorrent and wicked, and may I commend my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South and her sterling efforts to make sure that these children are not forgotten in this place. But unfortunately, this isn't the first time that children have been used as a weapon of war. We've seen it in Nigeria and other places in recent years. What more can this government do to ensure that this isn't normalised by dictators and despots across the world, and that children cannot be used as a weapon of war? And what more can be done to ensure the return of Ukraine's 20,000 stolen children?
Minister.
My honourable friend asks an incredibly important question. She is right that it is children who are bearing the worst brunts of conflict. I was in Yemen this week and appalled to see so many children with both moderate and severely acute malnutrition. That malnutrition is in very significant order created by the Houthis, who have restricted aid access into North Yemen and indeed detained UN aid workers and seized their offices. What happens in Ukraine, conducted by Russian forces, is seen elsewhere. It is seen by the Houthis, it's seen by militias in Nigeria. This country will stand up for an international rules-based order, which includes the protections that children are entitled to. We will continue to work to ensure the safe return of those 20,000 Ukrainian children. 600 of them have been identified by the mechanism which we co-fund and co-founded with the Ukrainians, and we will continue to work to ensure that all the remaining children are returned.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I welcome the courage of the American people over many, many decades in standing up for our liberties and defending our freedoms. May I also draw attention to the fact that this wonderful act of generosity has supported a US economy that has grown more powerfully, more capably, and in more directions than any other economy in human history, making the United States now the richest and most powerful country the world has ever known. Would he agree with me that that stance on the side of truth and justice genuinely has been a great blessing for all free peoples, and that standing against people traffickers, child traffickers, calling out, for example, folk like Jeffrey Epstein, but seeing here the world's largest child trafficker almost getting away with it, would be a betrayal of those great American values that have literally led to the happiness and prosperity of one of the wonderful countries of this world.
Minister.
I thank the gallant member for his question. The US and UK have stood together on questions of European order ever since the Second World War. I'm incredibly proud that it was a Labour Foreign Secretary that led the creation of NATO. I know that our American friends continue to see questions of European security and order as being of the utmost importance, and that security and order cannot coexist with a world in which territory is seized by force and children are abducted in exactly the way he describes.
David Burton Sampson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The stealing of Ukrainian children by Putin is scandalous and equally devastating for the Ukrainian families impacted. Putin is showing no desire to ceasefire in Ukraine, with continued bombardments on the Ukrainian people day in, day out. Does he agree with me that until Putin demonstrates he is committed to returning these children and committed to a ceasefire, we must continue to provide Ukraine with all the military, economic and diplomatic support that it needs?
The honourable member puts it very well, and I do. We will continue to stand with Ukraine for all the reasons that honourable members have expressed this morning, and we will continue to do so until talks have started, until a just and sovereign future for Ukraine is secured.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Wokingham, there is a Ukrainian refugee community who have made a positive difference to the area. I have worked with local groups to help supply aid to civilians in Ukraine, and many have shared their concerns about the war and the safety of their relatives back home. I fully support the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire on her comments about the 20,000 stolen Ukrainian children by the Russians. But can I ask the Minister, what is the government doing to reassure the many Ukrainians in my constituency that the UK support for Ukraine will remain steadfast against the Russian invasion, and that Putin will be held to account for his war crimes, and that Trump will not be allowed to backtrack on his support for Ukraine and NATO?
Minister.
I want to pay tribute, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the work of the honourable member and his constituents to support Ukrainians. I know that right across the House, both honourable members and their constituents have been engaged in supporting Ukrainians in many different ways. I myself have met with the Ukrainian community in Lincoln, and there are many people in Lincoln who've taken Ukrainians in or provided support. And I would like to assure all of those people that we will continue to stand with Ukrainians on these questions. He asks the important question about how we can continue to try and identify those children who have been seized by the Russians. There is work ongoing using often Russian databases themselves, which are relatively freely available, to identify where Ukrainian children are likely to have been taken in Russia. I imagine that Russian authorities think that people are not sufficiently interested to track individual children, and I can assure the House that we are, that we will continue to follow this to the end. We have identified 600 individual Ukrainian children by name alongside our Ukrainian friends. We will not forget the names of those children. We will not forget the locations of those children. The Russian families who have sought to take in those children should know that such an effort is ongoing, that it is supported right across the government, right across the House and right across the country. We will continue day in and day out to ensure those children are returned.
Adam Jogi.
Kind Madam Speaker, thank you. Using children in this way is sick and there is no other word for it. Now the people of Newcastle and Lyme opened their homes, they spoke out, they spoke up and they stood with the people of Ukraine and still do. They raised money, they donated medical supplies, books and clothes, and I thank them all for their efforts and their commitment. But whilst we rightly support the people of Ukraine against Russia, we also see Russia continuing to seek influence in other parts of the world through money, through arms and the rest. So this is a geopolitical challenge that we think rightly in one part of the world we're getting right, but we can't afford to ignore in others. So can I ask the Minister what we're doing to help to ensure that we neutralise Russia's attempt at command and control in other parts of the world?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the important question. Russia exerts a malign influence, not just obviously in Ukraine. We have seen their relationship with the Houthis. We have seen their relationships in Syria, and I'm glad to see that they have declined in recent months, but they continue through Africa Corps and a number of other arms of their state to be a malign influence right across the world. Their efforts are always at the expense of the populations where they are found. We continue to work with our friends and allies across the world. I was discussing malign Russian influence in Yemen in recent days. I have discussed it in Libya. I have discussed it in Syria, and we will continue to act across the world as you would expect, as I know my honourable friend pays close attention to. We will not rest while Russia continues to exert such a malign influence on global affairs. We wish to have a friendship. We have historic and long relations with the Russian people. I know that nothing would give greater pleasure to so many in the UK to have a more normal relationship with the Russian state than we currently do, but that will require significant changes from the Russian state, who continue to exert such a malign influence on global affairs.
Will Forster.
Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the most important things the UK can do to support Ukraine is push President Trump on a comprehensive G7 plan to seize the estimated £300 billion of Russian assets across those 7 nations and funnel them to Ukraine. Please can the Minister confirm what steps the government has taken to push President Trump on this, to build that international coordination on seizing Russian assets, including Sutton Place in my constituency of Woking.
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question. We have worked across our allies and friends in order to ensure that there is a robust and unified approach to these issues. I've described some of the statements that we have made in recent days, and I can confirm that the Foreign Secretary discussed the questions engaged in Ukraine at some length with the Secretary of State on the sidelines of the G7 last week. We will continue to do all that we can and everything that it takes to ensure that we are putting the pressure on Russia that is required to ensure that this war comes to an end.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In September, I had the privilege of meeting in Kiev with Raisa Kravchenko and Yulia Klepets of the All-Ukraine NGO Coalition for People with Intellectual Disabilities. They told me of the devastating impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine for disabled people. Will my honourable friend agree it is particularly distressing that when Russian forces have kidnapped Ukrainian children, they have targeted disabled children, and that when we can finally look to reconstruction and rebuilding Ukraine, specific support will be required for disabled people who have suffered so much as a result of Russia's aggression and crimes for which Russia must be held accountable?
My honourable friend is right. These are actions almost beyond comprehension. To be targeting disabled children in this way is a crime that will not be forgotten, and he's absolutely right that it is always the most vulnerable who are worst affected by conflict. That is particularly true of people who are disabled. It's something we consider in our own aid efforts in Ukraine, and of course must be considered as part of reconstruction efforts, as he says.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his answers and for his very strong focus for the Ukrainian children, for the Honourable Lady for Paisley as well, for all that she's done. We appreciate it. The trafficking of children and forced adoption of Ukrainian children to Russia is truly despicable. The re-education camps or the brainwashing of children to forget or to erase their Ukrainian heritage is detestable, and the need for British involvement is undeniable. So will the Minister outline, please, what steps we will take to bring these children home to their families instead of accepting that they are prisoners of war, which is disgusting, inhuman and contemptible?
I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman. His tone is absolutely right. I've described some of the tracing efforts that we're engaged in. Clearly, simply locating these children in Russia is not enough. They must be returned to. We will continue at every level. I know that the Minister for Europe has met with some of the organisations and civil society organisations involved in these efforts, as has Baroness Harman, our Special Envoy on Women and Girls. The Foreign Secretary has discussed them with her opposite numbers. We will continue to give this the focus that the honourable gentleman rightly demands of us, and I want to assure the country that we will continue to focus on this issue until those children are returned.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It would seem that the traditional role of the American President as someone who can straddle the world stage, working with friends and allies to achieve outcomes for the good across the world, are in danger of being diminished to those of someone who proffers capitulation on behalf of another sovereign nation. And that is something that we cannot accept. However, with regard to the children that are the focus of the debate today, and again I would pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, as young people are returned, and hopefully in increasing numbers, what work can we do as a country and as a government to ensure the reintegration of those young people into the society that Putin has worked so hard to prevent them to being part of?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. We of course, must work to see these children returned. We're an active member of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children. We work closely with the Ukrainian government on these questions. She is absolutely right that when children are returned, one can hardly imagine the trauma, the confusion, and the status of those children upon their return to Ukraine, and we will do what we can to support the Ukrainian government in their efforts in that area.
Jacob Collier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, all of us want to see peace in Ukraine, but it must be on the terms of the Ukrainian people that they are fully behind. Russia cannot gain or be seen to gain from their illegal and unprovoked invasion. So what assurances can the Minister give that this government will stand fully behind Ukraine in making sure that it is a peace agreement on their terms?
Minister.
My honourable friend has been a doughty champion for Ukraine's interests in this House, and he is right. We are working with our friends and allies, particularly at the G7. I've described the statement which we agreed last week in relation to questions of ceasefire and negotiations, which, as he says, must be on the basis of Ukraine's sovereign interests. And we will continue to work with G7 partners, condemning Russia's actions, condemning their provision of arms to others, as well as their actions in Ukraine, and increasing the economic costs to them, as we have set out in our most recent sanctions measures.